2, 3.
Okay, folks, we got some business to take care of here before we introduce our keynote speaker. First of all, if you all notice the table here to the right of the doors as you would go out, there's a whole bunch of photos on there. Those were the photos that we had that came in for our photo contest and also art entries. And so what we're going to do is we are going to announce the winners, and when we call your name, please come on up because we got some money for you. First of all, we're going to do our winner for the art contest. And where is Bree Nosel at? Yeah. Congratulations, Bree. All right, and our photo contest, what we're going to do is we're going to start off with third place and work our way up to the winners. And we actually had a judge who reviewed all of the photos and made his selections. And so we actually had a tie for third place. And we're going to put their pictures up here that they had. And the first one is Dan Ross. Dan, if you'd come on up here. And this was Dan's entry. There you go. Congratulations. And the next one, Peter Good. Where's Peter at? I hope I didn't mispronounce your name too bad. That's perfect. Okay, great. Congratulations. All right. Our second place winner, David Brookshire. Come on up, David. This was David's entry. Where's David? No David. David Brookshire. No, not here. All right, well, he'll hold his. And our grand prize winner goes to James Menzies for this amazing shot of lightning in the Grand Canyon. Come on up, James. Where's James at? Well, since neither one of them are here, does anybody want some cash? No, I'm just kidding here. Oh, David, all right. Congratulations. James, you are not here, huh? Oh, my goodness. Okay. So the next order of business is we have 3 grand prizes that we're gonna draw. Karen, come on up here, would you? Come on up here. Yes, you got to be part of this. So come on up here. Can't be behind the scenes all the time. These will be with your red tickets. Oh, where are the red tickets? Oh, they're right here. Okay. These will be with your red tickets, and the first prize that we're going to give away is the Accurite Professional Weather Center. Accurite Professional Weather Center. So, red tickets only. Don't throw your blue ones away because those will still be good for all the rest of these prizes that we're going to give away tomorrow. Okay? So, Karen, go ahead and pull a number, and what do you got?
Highest bidder.
The red ticket. Whoever has ticket number 3, 2, 4. 324. Oh, congratulations. Come on up. James, come on up. We have some money for you for your grand prize winner of your Grand Canyon lightning photo. Beautiful, beautiful shot.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right, the next grand prize that we're going to give away is the Maximum Signal Amplifier. This is a great prize. Karen and I actually tried this out recently, and I tell you what, it works. It works really, really well. You want to boost a signal in a remote area from 1 bar to 5, get one of these, and you'll be able to stream and get data and everything. This is an amazing app. I've tried some of the Wilson products and some other products, and there's nothing that compares to it, if you want my honest opinion. All right, so we're going to draw for the maximum signal prize. I'm sorry? Maximum signal. Yeah, you have a brochure in your pamphlet there, and Gord actually offers, I think, $50 off of the price of one for like the next 30 days if you want to buy one from him. All right, the next number. Oh, we're not in the 300s. No, actually, we're not even in the 400s. Is anybody in the 500s? Is anybody in the 510s? 5-1 something? Does anybody have 515? 515. Oh, we got a winner? All right. Congratulations. That's the one. There's your prize. You'll love it out in the field. It's an awesome product. All right, and our last product, the grand prize, is for a mobile ThreatNet system from Barron Services. This is one that Cliff Wyndham actually donates every year. Cliff is almost always here every year, but this year he couldn't make it. But he did give us a little video that we're going to watch real quick right before we make this drawing.
Weather affects everyone, every home, every climate, every day. It's critical in every country, every industry. How you prepare and respond can be the difference in lives saved or lost, property protected or destroyed, and being ready for whatever comes next. You need a partner who can equip you with intelligent solutions to prepare for and protect against significant weather threats. Barron is the standard for critical weather intelligence. Through decades of work across the globe, Barron has led the way in every market, inventing and innovating weather solutions. Since inventing street-level storm tracking, we haven't stopped breaking new ground in weather data, radar hardware, real-time display capabilities, and hyper-local dissemination tools. Partners benefit from our effective, reliable solutions, tailored to their precise needs. This cohesive network of tools offers the flexibility to incorporate legacy assets. To identify hydrological threats, dual pole data provides the most powerful and accurate hydrometeor information available. Barron leads the way in dual pole data products with solutions that can pinpoint events like hail, flooding, and more. Our world-class radar systems have been proven in countries across the globe, including the successful upgrade of the United States National Weather Service radar system to dual pole. A complete suite of display solutions and class-leading data products work together to effectively display and interpret live radar. Additionally, Barron forecast models provide the most precise model guidance and weather prediction. Digital solutions provide hyper-local dissemination of information, send alerts to an exact area to notify people who are in the path of a threat. Barron defines the standard in significant weather solutions, turning meteorological data into actionable intelligence to save lives, to protect property, and to prepare for what's next. Barron is your partner for critical weather intelligence.
Okay, here's a little letter from Cliff to whoever wins this. He says, congratulations on winning our mobile ThreatNet system valued at $1,154. And you also get a 6-month subscription to the web-based Barron ThreatNet valued at $390 for a total prize value of $1,544. So whoever wins this is gonna get a really nice prize package. All right, Karen, who do we have? Well, I guess it's only fitting that the first prize was in the 300s, the second prize was in the 500s, so guess what's in between? the 400. So somebody who's in the 400s is going to win this prize. And actually somebody who is in the 460s is going to win this. And if somebody has a number of 466, you are the winner. All right, congratulations, Brittany. I need your ticket. Well, that's not the one. No, I'm just kidding. No, that is it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, and I guess we found somebody's car key laying on the floor. If this looks like it may be yours, let us know. You were raffled off. All right. Look at me, a good 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 40, 50. All right. Now you are in for a treat. It's time to introduce our keynote speaker. John Davies has been with ChaserCon off and on for many, many, many years. Some of you remember some of the forecasting classes that John used to teach years ago, and some of you remember some of the presentations that he's made over the years. John actually had to take a little bit of time away from us, so it just felt right that this year that John Davies would be our keynote speaker, and thank you, John, for accepting it, and the floor is yours, sir.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. Wow, I guess I'm a little nervous. I haven't talked at ChaserCon here has it been 3 years, I think, so I'm a little out of practice. But first of all, I want to thank Roger just for that nice introduction. And I want to thank Roger and Karen for inviting me again, because it's really nice to be back. I want to thank the guys with SevereStudios, including James Skivers, who's a good friend. He does a good job running things up here. So Roger and Karen takes a lot of work to run this thing, and there's a lot to it. So I really appreciate what they do. Well, they asked me to do a keynote, and I haven't done a keynote at ChaserCon, and I thought, well, I guess I better not do anything very technical. And my wife made sure that I would know to do something entertaining. So I'll try to make this kind of entertaining, okay? And I wondered, what should I talk about? And my wife said, well, why don't you just talk about your weather career, if you want to call it that. It's been kind of an interesting journey, and she thought that would be entertaining. And so I thought that's what I'd talk about tonight, everything from my growing up to TV broadcasting to research. And research is something I didn't intend really to do initially. I didn't think I'd be smart enough to, but I've been able to do some operational forecasting research, which has been fun and fulfilling. And storm chasing is a big part of that for me, kind of in a different way. You know, most storm chasing researchers have all this equipment and they're taking precise readings out in the field, they're doing remote sensing. I'm more of a subjective type of guy, and I think people roll their eyes at that a bit, but I just like to go out and observe things very carefully. And watching the storms behave out in nature like that suggests things to me that I would like to research that might be helpful with forecasting. And I'll talk a little more about that as we get into it. So that's a little bit different approach. But anyhow, let's get on into it here. I thought I'd start with this quote. My sister's a lot more Zen than I am. And she's always reminding me that life is a journey, not a destination, because sometimes I get kind of uptight about things and all the details. And I love this picture. This is by her husband, Kyle Gershner. He's a great photographer, better than I am, and he's also a pretty good storm chaser. But anyhow, there's a lot of truth to this quote here, because my life has really been a journey. It hasn't gone at all quite where I thought it would. But it's important, like Ferris Bueller says, you know, you have to kind of watch out once in a while, because if life goes pretty fast, as Shauna would say, and if you don't stop and look at it once in a while, you'll miss it. And there's a lot of truth to that. Well, my name's John. I imagine some of you newer chasers around here maybe don't know who I am. I've been storm chasing for 30 years. And I don't know if anybody here's been to an AA meeting, but if they had a storm chasers addiction meeting, I'd have to raise my hand and say, my name is John, and I'm a storm addict. And thank you. And I've been on the wagon now for several months. It's been cool outside, but I have a feeling in a month I'm going to fall off the wagon again. So we're going to have to watch that. I grew up in South Central Kansas. I love Kansas. I'm not a fan of what they've done to the education system there, but I love the state. I love the wheat fields. I love the open sky. I love the sunsets. The big sky was always a big thing for me there. And I miss it. I live in Kansas City. I like Kansas City, but I miss the open spaces. I grew up in the town of Pratt. If you've ever driven through there storm chasing, I guess they have two claims to fame. They have the Miss Kansas pageant each year. And if you've driven up North Main Street, you've seen the hot and cold water towers, which make people smile. A lot of people take pictures of that. I was a pretty shy kid, very quiet, kind of kept to myself, loved to read. A little hard for me to connect with other people, and I'll admit that getting up here in front of you tonight, I'm a little nervous, so that's part of my shyness, but I've managed to overcome some of that. But growing up in open spaces out in Kansas with all the storms, wow, weather was a big thing for me, as I'm sure it has been for many people in this room since they were a kid. Being kind of a quiet kid, it was a big thing for me. It kept me sane because it seemed like weather's kind of unpredictable, but there's always going to be another storm system coming through, and you can look forward to the next thing, and each system's going to be a little different. And it really kept me sane and gave me something to look forward to when I kind of felt out of sorts. Well, obviously, growing up in Kansas, you hear a lot about tornadoes, and the tornado I heard a lot about growing up as a kid was the 1955 Udall tornado. I was born that same year. Udall's a small town south of Wichita, Kansas, and they got hit in 1955 after dark, and unfortunately 80 people lost their lives with that tornado. And so everybody talked about that when I was growing up. And that fascinated me and it terrified me, but the combination of the two things made me want to learn more about tornadoes. I just really wanted to know more about these. And my favorite book in the library is this book here, Snowden Flores, Tornadoes of the United States. He's a Kansas climatologist and meteorologist, I believe. The book was published in 1953. And so you go to the library. Back then, there weren't really any books completely about tornadoes. There'd be books that would have little sections about tornadoes. But this is the only book in the library that was really about tornadoes. And so I'd go in and check it out. Sometimes a mom would have to do it because it was in the adult section. And I think the librarian would look at me sometimes. I bet I checked it out 30 times between the age of 5 and 9. And so he probably got tired of seeing me come. But anyhow, this was my favorite book. And years later, my brother BJ bought me a copy at a sale. And so it's kind of a precious possession of used for anywhere from $50 to some people charge $200 for it. But it was my favorite book coming out of the library. I love the pictures. Back in the early 60s, it was hard to find tornado pictures. I think we forget that. Today, you can have a tornado and it's not HP. You'll probably see pictures of it minutes later, or if not minutes, at least by the next day. Tornado pictures are a dime a dozen these days. They're sometimes almost boring. But back then, it was hard to find pictures, and I just would sit and look at this book when I was 5 years old, looking at all the pictures and imagining what a tornado looked like and acted like. And as I got older and I learned to read more, I'd start reading the stories. And one of my favorite anecdotes in here was by a farmer named Will Keller in 1928. He lived near Greensburg, which is less than 30 miles from where I grew up. And I would read this account where he saw a tornado coming. It sounds like it was a multiple vortex tornado. And then he claims that it went right over him, and he looked up into the funnel, and it was hollow, and it was continuously illuminated by lightning. And there were little tornadoes going around inside of it and hissing. And I think as an adult, I realized that was probably a radically enhanced description to a newspaper reporter or somebody. But I was fascinated by that discussion. I'd try to draw pictures of tornadoes that looked like that. And my favorite thing to draw, being a twisted little kid like I was tornadoes. Here's something I drew probably when I was about 6 years old. I just loved to draw the tornadoes. If you look at the top of the, whoa, I hit the wrong button here. Maybe I better have James switch this for me because I'm just clumsy enough. Let's go forward right there. Let's stop there. Sorry about that, guys. I'm going to use my pointer here. If you look at the clouds up here, I didn't have a good idea of convective updrafts at that point because that's pretty shallow to have all those tornadoes coming out of it, as I learned later. Next slide, please. Well, I spent a lot of afternoons in the spring sitting out on my fence. We live south of Pratt. on a hill. And out in the country, that was a big view, and I loved to sit out in the backyard and watch storms form on storm days. And I was always hoping I would see a tornado, but I was always interested in whatever storms came through. And even in the middle of the night, if a squall line came through, I'd probably wake up out of bed and I'd go climb over to the window and look out and hope to see a tornado and the lightning and things like that. But I waited around to see a tornado for a long time, and I thought, I'm never going to see a tornado. It just never happens. But finally, when I was age 9, a tornado touched down near Pratt. This is not an unusual outbreak. It was on May 25th, 1965. But the strongest tornado in the outbreak was near Pratt. It touched down west of Pratt, and it went north and hit the airport and hit the town of Iuka. And that was the first tornado I saw. Next slide, please. These are some pictures that were taken by the Pratt Tribune photographer as the tornado went northwest of Pratt. And I remember I was sitting outside that afternoon, and the storms got dark in the west and were coming toward Pratt. And I was hoping something would come and I'd be able to see it, and maybe there'd be a tornado. But of course, my mom called me in for dinner saying, "John, get in here." So I go in for dinner, and while we're eating dinner, our neighbor called and said, "There's a tornado out north of Pratt." And boy, when I heard that, I was out the door as fast as you could go. And then my folks and my sister and my brother followed. And I could see this tornado off in the distance, about 6 miles, 7 miles. It was north of Pratt. And I do very clearly remember the clouds coming in from the east into the storm, and then the clouds from the southwest, probably the flanking line, though I didn't know that was what it was at the time. They were coming in from the southwest, and they were all going right into the tornado. I remember that made a really big impression on me. Next slide. Now, what I think is really interesting about this tornado, and if you've heard me speak some other times, how many people in here know who Dave Hoadley is? I hope you do. I want to see a lot of hands. He is the grandfather of storm chasing. He's actually been storm chasing since the late 1950s. He was doing it before any of us were doing it. And he was taking a lot of garbage for it, too, because I think people thought he was crazy. But I'm glad he was out there doing this. The first tornado that he actually got a really good photograph of was this same tornado that I saw on May 25th, 1965. And if you want to read his account, it's online. It's in the Storm Track archive. I didn't know about this until the 1980s, but that's fascinating. Next slide. This is the actual photograph up there, and believe it or not, that picture he took, which is a kind of an infamous photograph, it's been in a lot of pictures, was taken less than a quarter mile from my dad's business on the west side of Pratt. And the wall cloud for this tornado actually went right over my dad's business, but the tornado didn't touch down until about 3/4 mile past it. And so we were very lucky that way. The bottom photograph is as the tornado was moving through Iuka, Kansas. And you can see that it doesn't look like it extends to the ground, but certainly there was damage going on the whole time, though I didn't realize that. Next slide. Here's some of the damage. There was an air base, the Pratt Airport, back in World War II when we were in a big war with the Japanese. They were worried about an invasion, and so they put all these air bases out in the central part of the country in case we got into a ground war or whatever here in air war, in the United States. And so one of the companies in Pratt was a gas tank manufacturer. These are not barrels. Those are full-size gas tanks that you bury down in the concrete. Some of those got carried or rolled like a half, 3/4 of a mile away. And one other anecdote is this hangar was destroyed. They didn't rebuild it. There's just a lot of concrete there. And years later, my dad bought part of the hangar and covered it over for storage for his business. Next slide, please. One other event, and I think this is a big one for Roger Hill as well, is the Topeka tornado back in 1966. This is a great book. I highly recommend it if you want to read about a tornado disaster from before the tornado and all the accounts and the aftermath. It's an excellent book, and it's a really good read. So Bonar Menninger's book is excellent. So if you're looking for something to read, I'd recommend that. But anyhow, this tornado made quite an impression on me the next year. I remember the weather guys on TV were showing the low coming across Kansas, and so I went out in the backyard, and I think it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you could see some towering cumulus, and it was very close to the center of the low, and they came right across Pratt, and then they went on up near Hutchinson, and when they got toward Hutchinson, suddenly everything exploded into very crisp towers and then thunderstorms. And I remember sitting there on the fence thinking, somebody's going to get a tornado today. It just has that look. And sure enough, they did. And unfortunately, 16 people lost their lives, though. It really could have been much worse. Next slide. So that kind of cemented my interest in weather. I was very fascinated with it. And I started to think about, okay, is there something I can do with this as a career? And I watched weather guys on TV. We called them weathermen back then. This is one of them, Jim O'Donnell with Cake TV in Wichita. Next slide. Another one was Cecil Currier with KWCH. He was the old man of Wichita. He'd actually covered the Udall tornado. Both these guys were pretty good. They'd had training during World War II and really knew their weather. And so I think you could call them meteorologists, where a lot of TV stations didn't have people that know that much about weather. But I thought about this and I thought, well, yeah, maybe I could be a weather guy, because that's what I would see on TV. Next slide. But here's the problem. As I got into high school and got into math, I had my problems with math. I think it was just all the symbols and stuff, and they scared me. And I remember sitting at the table, my kitchen table, working on stuff, and my mom would have to come in and calm me down when I'd work on math, because I'd throw little tantrums. So this kind of scared me, because I knew that if I wanted to get a degree in meteorology, I was going to have to take quite a bit of math and physics. Next slide. Another thing I enjoyed was music, and that was a lot more fun than the math and physics. I played trumpet and also played piano. And not being too intelligent, but my folks went along with it, I decided, well, I'm going to major in music, and maybe I can do something with music at Wichita State University in Wichita. Next slide. And so I went there, and like I said, I was kind of an odd kid. Instead of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, I was more into orchestra music. I learned how to write stuff. I wrote some things that would get performed. And I even was into film scores. I loved, as a kid, I loved movies like Jason and the Argonauts and the James Bond films, and music was a big part of that. And so I was into film scores as well, and I'd sit down and try to transcribe things and write them out, and I really loved doing that. But I found out that I wasn't a very good performer in front of people, and I probably didn't have the confidence to do this, and I think my folks figured I would figure that out pretty quickly. And so next slide, I decided to go back to my meteorology idea. And by the way, I forgot to hold up, here's the Snowden Flora book that I own. I really appreciate my brother getting me a copy of this. This is a valuable possession for me. It's all wrinkled up, but that makes it more special. But here's the notebook I took notes in with my meteorology course at Wichita State. They only had one meteorology course, an introductory one. But of all people who taught it was Cecil Currier, who was the guy I watched growing up. And he actually turned out to be a very good teacher. He knew his stuff, was well organized, had a nice balance between some simple math and some other things with concepts. And so I did really well in that class, and I found I really enjoyed it. And it made me think, well, maybe I could do something with this after all. Next slide. So I decided to go to school for meteorology, and immediately I went to University of Oklahoma, which was probably a little quick, because when I got there, I found I couldn't get into the meteorology classes. And you probably can't see from back here. This is part of my transcript. Let's see. Here's the University of Oklahoma. Here's Calculus 3. Look right there, D. Not very good. I remember taking that red calculus book and throwing it against the wall several times. And so my house, my folks' house at Pratt actually burned down. And I wasn't doing too well in school, so I quit after one semester, went back to Pratt, helped my folks kind of get on their feet and do some things there. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, maybe I can try this another way. It's cheaper to do it in state tuition at the University of Kansas. So I went there after getting a few courses at the Pratt Community College. And they didn't have a full meteorology program at KU. They were lacking a couple courses, and so I actually took some correspondence from Penn State. Didn't do any better than C's. But I got through it. It took me a while. This is a really patchwork degree because there's material on it just to get a bachelor's degree. I went to 1, 2, 3, 4 schools. But I got it done. And so I guess the point I want to make is if you want to do something and you have a real passion about it, and maybe there's part of it that's really difficult and you're not sure you can do it, if you have a strong enough passion, believe me, and you're willing to work hard enough, you can get through it. You may not make the best grades, but you can do it. All right? Next slide. Well, I graduated from KU in 1980, and I got a job at a TV station. Back then, the Weather Service wasn't hiring a whole lot unless you wanted to go to some remote location. And so a lot of the guys, a lot of the TV stations were hiring meteorologists now because they wanted the name meteorologist. And so I got a little job at a TV station in Topeka, KTSB, where I did weekend weather and a little bit of reporting and a little bit of this and a little bit of that. The guy during the weekdays, he was just a radio guy, didn't know anything about weather. And the biggest thing that kind of ticked me off is he got to wear a turtleneck where I had to wear a tie on weekends. That was a small thing to be worried about. We had just a teletype and magnets on a board, so it kind of got me started. If I wanted to do anything more sophisticated on air, I would have to get a satellite photograph from the National Weather Service, so I'd go by there sometimes when I go into work. And so I tried to make things interesting and learn how to present myself on TV. One other sidelight, this guy's named Steve Ducey, and he was at KU too when I was there. He was in the journalism department, and he worked at KTSB. That was his first job out of school, and he would anchor weekends sometimes, and I would work with him. And if you watch Fox and Friends on Fox News in the mornings, you know that's him. So he started in that small station too. Next slide. Well, I worked my way up. I actually got a job in Cedar Rapids, Iowa that was a little better job, and worked there for a while. And then I got back to Wichita, and got a job at a station there. And my folks could watch me on TV, and I think they were kind of thrilled about that. Eventually, I worked my way up to the Weather Channel in 1982. I had a friend, next slide. There we go. This guy right here, I worked with him in Wichita, Dennis Smith. He helped get me an audition there. Now, cable TV was a new thing back then. This is about, 1982, I guess I said. And so that was new. And I think a lot of people thought John Coleman, who started the Weather Channel, was kind of nuts. Who's going to watch weather 24 hours a day? But I thought it was a great idea because, growing up, I had to wait for the 6 and 10 newscasts to see any weather. And, you get tired of waiting around for that. You just want to be able to turn the TV on and see what's going on. And so I think it was a great idea. I don't know that I was that good on air. I didn't think my audition was that good, but for some reason they hired me. And my wife insisted that I show a little clip here to make it entertaining. One of her favorite movies is Anchorman with Will Ferrell, and she calls this my Anchorman face. So let's play a little video here. I apologize for the cheesiness of it.
A staff of dedicated people. The Weather Channel. People dedicated to your weather needs. John Davies. Graduated from the University of Kansas, John was anchor meteorologist in Kansas and Iowa. As forecaster for 2 private firms, he prepared special weather reports for agricultural and construction clients and for radio and utilities.
Thanks for joining us here at the Weather Channel. I'm Sally Schmees. This is John Davies to keep you updated on all the heavy weather across the nation.
You betcha. We've got just a little bit of everything, Sally. I'm John Davies. I'll be with you for the next half hour or so here on the Weather Channel. Let's see what's happening with the current map. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we've got just a little bit of everything for you. And still very heavy thunderstorms just to the northwest of Houston, and some of these may affect Houston later this morning, and very intense thunderstorms southeast of Cotulla also.
Well, looking back, I don't think I was that good, but I was thrilled to have that job because I was on national cable TV. And believe it or not, I guess the Weather Channel was only on about 15% of the cable channels at that time, but Pratt, Kansas got that. And so my mom was ill at the time, and she'd be laying in her bed late at night and couldn't sleep, and I worked a night shift. So she could turn me on and watch me, and I think that was pretty special, actually. Well, unfortunately, the Weather Channel had some financial issues after I'd been there about a year, and they decided to downsize a little bit. And so I was one of the new hires. I had no family. I was really young, so I was one of the guys to go, and that was kind of a bummer. That kind of hurt my confidence. But I looked at it and I said, I've been in 4 TV stations in 4 years, and I'm a little tired of moving around. I'm not sure I want to do this. And like I said, my mom was kind of ill back in Pratt, so I decided I'll go back to Pratt for a few months and kind of get my feet on the ground. This is my dad right here. He ran a business there in Pratt. He ran a small manufacturing business for a while. He made everything from farm couplings to farm plows. And then when manufacturing started to get too expensive and hard to make money at, he decided to go to something different. Because my mom was ill, we got medical oxygen out of Wichita. And he looked at this and said, they're not giving us very good service. I can do this better myself. And that was my dad. He was kind of an entrepreneur. So he bought some oxygen equipment, learned how to use it. and started picking up clients around Pratt and started a new business. And believe it or not, it actually was doing fairly well. And so when I went back, he was needing somebody to do some computer programming so we could submit insurance claims electronically. So I kind of took that over and got involved in the business. But like I said, I thought I'd only be there for about 3 months. And instead, I was there for 7 years. So you never know how things are going to work. Next slide, please. But one thing that was interesting was, for the first time, I was actually doing a job where I was kind of my own boss, if it was okay with my dad sometimes. But I had some flexibility once I got settled into the job, that there were days maybe I could take part of the afternoon off and try to storm chase. And storm chasing was something that was very new to me. The first time I'd really heard about it was when I was working in Wichita. I heard a few people talk about it, and I thought, wow, you mean there's people that get in their cars and they actually drive out and intercept storms? That sounds kind of cool. And I know the Weather Channel people would talk about it. So when I began to get a little more time, I thought, I'll try some of this myself. Had no data other than the Weather Channel or the local TV stations. The late 1980s weren't a great time to try to storm chase in Kansas, if anybody's old enough to remember, because there weren't a lot of storms at that time. But I would go out and give it a try with my little cheap Instamatic camera. And this is probably the most success I had, was this little storm southeast of Pratt that produced some gust front vortices. I didn't know that you called them gustnadoes back then. I knew they weren't tornadoes, but I thought they were kind of interesting. But that's about the best I could do. Next slide. So I felt like this a lot of the time. This is Jeff Bridges in The Big Lebowski trying to solve a case, being very clueless. The dude, yes. So like, that's your opinion, man. But okay. Anyhow, I felt like this a lot of the time, and I thought, boy, I don't know if this storm chasing thing's going to work out. I'd tried it for a couple years, but sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. Next slide. Then along came 1990, and this is March 11th, 1990, and it was an important day in my life because it was my first successful tornado chase intercept. What happened was, I was at home, living with my dad out in the country at that time. I was at home, and it was a Sunday, and I think the severe weather was focused down in Texas, where they had a tornado watch. Weren't expecting much up in Kansas, and it was raining heavily most of the day in Pratt, and I was in my bedroom reading. But I noticed that the rain stopped in the afternoon and the sun came out, which I wasn't expecting it to do. And I went out in the front yard to look at the sky. And off to the southeast was a convective tower, looked kind of like a towering cumulus, and on the bottom it was dark, and I could see the cloud rolling around. And I thought, wow, what is that? And so that cloud went up just east of our house, and then we're looking north here from my backyard, and this little shower, this is the top of it, it looked like a rain shower, started putting out rain, and it went past Pratt, and I was watching it, and it looked like this is rotating. And I knew enough about storm structure, at least at that time. I thought this might be a rear flank downdraft here. We're looking northeast. And the other thing that struck me was all these clouds are flying into it from the east. And I thought, well, I'll get my cheap VHS camera and my point and shoot, and maybe I'll follow it for a little bit. Next slide. Followed it up into Stafford County, Kansas. And look how short this thing is. I was following it, and I thought, what in the heck am I doing out here? This isn't going to do anything. Well, 10 minutes later, look what happened. Next slide. Planted this tornado on the ground. This is kind of an infamous photograph. Some of you have probably seen it. But it's really something. I'm only probably about 6 or 8 miles away from the tornado, if even that. But I stopped the car and got my camera out, and I could get the whole thing in the viewfinder with the sunlit tornado underneath it. I thought, wow, that's really something. How's that happening? Next slide. This little storm, no lightning, so maybe it's hard to call it a storm, produced 3 tornadoes in sequence, including this one that was photographed by the Hutch News. Next slide. And I'll be honest with you, I'd never seen photographs of anything like that or read about it, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. I wonder if it's something that's worth documenting. So I sent the photos into WeatherWise magazine. And this was basically my first published article. You wouldn't call it research, but they took my letter and turned it into an article and published the photographs in October of 1990, and boy, I was thrilled. That was exciting to me. Next slide. A few months later, I was able to get some data from the National Severe Storms Forecast Center and kind of look at this, because I was curious, how can you get a tornado from a small rain shower? I'm not sure I can answer that, but what I found was there was a closed low in the mid-levels. This is a 500 millibar low, and if you know anything about meteorology, closed lows are associated with cold air aloft. And when you have a closed low, there's quite a bit of cold air aloft, and if you can get just enough moisture up underneath that, the dew points don't have to be terribly high sometimes, maybe only low 50s, you might be able to get storms and tornadoes, and often those don't produce lightning because they're so shallow. So let's go to the next slide. I actually constructed a sounding from this, and if you look on this side, this is a skew T log P diagram. These are the heights here, thousands of feet. Here's 40,000 feet. If you know much about thunderstorms, you know most thunderstorms in the spring usually are 35, 40,000 feet tall, and then as you get into the summer, often they're even taller than 50,000. And that's because the cape, or the instability, extends through the atmosphere. But in this case, you can see it only extends up to here. It's less than 30,000 feet. It's about 24,000 feet is the top on this here. And that's probably one reason the shower was so shallow. That seemed to match pretty much what I could see visually. And another thing is with all this cape squeezed down low in the atmosphere, so to speak, maybe it helped with some of the vertical stretching. I sure didn't know, but I thought it was suggestive. Next slide. So after getting some more cases, I'm going to jump just ahead a little bit here. After getting a few more cases together, I kind of came up with this composite where you have a 500 millibar low here that's closed. A surface low is an important part of it to the east. And then you have boundaries. You have a dry line or a Pacific front. And this is an important feature here, this warm front. Sometimes it's not very prominent, but usually there's some kind of a wind shift from south or southeast to more easterly here. And if you get this well-organized surface pattern with the upper low within, say, roughly 200 statute miles, that's not a hard and fast rule, sometimes you can get tornadoes here right near this boundary intersection and just east of the low along this front. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. Now, when you do research, usually you're not doing anything that's terribly original. You're building on other people's research. And so what I did some reading. I found that Colonel Robert Miller of Fabush and Miller fame, if you know anything about weather history, he'd written a tech memo in, I guess it was a tech report in 1972, and he'd pointed out this pattern, though he didn't give a lot of detail to it. And there's another researcher, I don't know how you say Ernest's last name, it's Getch or Goach, I'm not sure, I apologize. He also wrote an informal paper, and so I just kind of built off of their work and gave it a little bit more detail. And an important feature here too is this area right here around the upper low. It needs to be sunny in here, and then you can get all this heating behind the dry line pointing right up into this area, and that heating seems to be very important to get enough cape to get your little cells that might produce tornadoes. Next slide. Well, let's go back to the dude, and I was thinking, yeah, maybe there's something here that's worth writing up, but I sure didn't know what to do with it or how to do it or whatever. So, next slide. This is where this man comes into my life. His name is Robert Johns. He's a forecaster at the National Severe Storms Forecast Center. And so when I wanted to get more data, because I had no data at home, I drove up to Kansas City one time and I walked into the Severe Storms Forecast Center. I think it's the 13th floor of the federal building there. That's where it was. It's now SPC. And I asked the secretary, do you guys have an archive of maps I could look at and that sort of thing? And Bob Johns came out and met me, and he took me back to the back room with boxes, and I could dig through maps and look at things. And bless Bob's heart, he seemed to recognize something in me. He could see I had a real curiosity about weather, and I had a passion about it. And so we talked a little bit, and I told him about my interest in the cold core thing, and I wanted to do a little research about that. And so he helped me and encouraged me to try to write some papers. Now Bob's he's done a lot of good work over the years. Next slide. You may know him from derechos. He wrote a classic paper in the 1980s, really bringing public and research awareness to convective windstorms that travel through several states with really strong winds and do a lot of damage, and they can even kill people. And I don't think too many people were aware of these up to this point. He kind of promoted the name derecho and talked about how to forecast these. And this is a very good paper. So this is the guy that was talking to me back in the room with all the boxes, I found out. And I thought that was pretty cool. Next slide. Well, I talked to him about this cold core stuff, and he encouraged me to write some stuff up. He said, you probably need a couple more cases. But he told me how to write an introduction, start from point A, go to point B. Kind of what's your hypothesis, or what are you trying to do? What's your methodology? Look at the data and what are your conclusions? And so he was very helpful. And so a couple years later, I was able to actually publish an informal paper for the AMS conference in St. Louis, and I had about 3 cases and these photographs. And so that was another paper I got published, and Bob was a big help with that, encouraging me. Next slide. And it took me a lot of years. I finally got a peer-reviewed paper published on this in 2006. And Bob taught me a lot about how to do peer-reviewed research, which is where when you get something published, they send it out to reviewers, colleagues, and experts in that field, and they either approve or reject it, and they give you all kinds of suggestions or criticisms on how to make it better. And he walked me through a lot of that process. So I was real pleased to get this published finally in 2006. And Dr. Forbes from the Weather Channel, he was one of the reviewers, and he made some very helpful comments on this, so I really appreciated that. Next slide. Well, Bob, he saw in me that I was a hard worker and I enjoyed working with data. I didn't mind working by myself because I'm kind of an introvert. And he had this idea that, well, we know that tornadoes occur in high cape environments, and we look at the strength of the wind fields in the low and mid levels, but there weren't a lot of real specific things that, like a parameter that might help with tornado forecasting. He was thinking, well, maybe we could put something together. There's storm relative helicity, and that was a new parameter that just had been come up with by Bob Davies Jones at the Bob Davies Jones. Sorry, too many Johns, too many Davies, and that's confusing. But Robert Davies Jones at the National Severe Storms Laboratory came up with the helicity parameter, and that was brand new. And Bob had this idea: why don't we try combining that with a measure of CAPE just to see if there's CAPE shear combinations that might be more associated with tornadoes? And he said, "Would you like to help me with it?" And I said, "Sure, Bob, I'll be happy to." So next slide. So we found 240 cases. This took a lot of work in the 1980s, and we found soundings that we thought were good enough to represent the environment of these cases. And we found these tornadoes that were F2 or greater intensity. And we had to do a lot of this work by hand because back then we had computers, but there wasn't software to compute CAPE, and certainly helicity was a new parameter. And so Bob would plot out the CAPE on his QT diagram and figure it out by hand by figuring out the area. And he gave me the helicity. And we did the helicity on this axis, and I had to figure out how to compute helicity using geometry, but I worked it out. And I did those by hand, plotting photographs and figuring the area as well. And so then we took all these cases and plotted them on this scatter diagram, and we saw that all the cases kind of went from upper left to lower right. And they tended to be more in the center here. It's not a lot of division when you get down over into here, but we did find that if we put a line in here, that seemed to include most of the data set, and the idea was if you're further above these lines with the CAPE and the helicity combination, maybe that would give you an idea whether the environment might be supportive of tornadoes depending on what else happened, because we certainly don't understand tornadogenesis. Next slide. And we got John Hart, who was a young programmer and forecaster there at SPC, to help us fit these lines in here and come up with equations for them. And then we decided to come up with a little parameter called the energy helicity index, where you multiply the helicity times the CAPE and divide by 160. You'd get a number. If it came out as 1, you'd be on this line. If it came out as 2, you'd be here. And if it was higher, you'd be up in here. And so the higher the number, the idea was, well, maybe the environment maybe is a little more supportive for tornadoes, though once again, we don't understand everything that's going on there. Next slide. So we wrote up some of this work. We didn't talk about the EHI yet, but we put it in a book. And this was my first experience with peer-reviewed research, and Bob walked me through this. And I really appreciate his help because he gave me confidence to do things that I didn't think I could do. Next slide. The EHI is still in use today. I think there's other parameters that are probably a little better, but people still use it. It's a pretty basic parameter. It just is kind of a bulk look at low-level shear and CAPE, and are they coming together and are maximized in an area, and that might suggest better support for tornadoes. This is last week. I don't know the date. This is the 9th, I guess, of March. There was a tornado in southeast Georgia at night. It wasn't well anticipated, but you can see the EHI is maximized in that area. Next slide. That's off Twister data, so they have a forecast of it there. And this is the SPC mesoanalysis. This is EHI here. And this is about the time of the tornado. You had these line of thunderstorms coming through. There's a front back here. But as these storms kind of dragged through the north part of this EHI area, there may have been a boundary here, because I don't think it's cool to chase bullseyes. You need to put it with the surface pattern and everything else that's going on. But it certainly seemed to support tornadoes in that case. I think there were 7 people that got injured in that, but nobody got killed. And STP, I think, is a more sophisticated parameter, and it's probably a little better. But often it'll show kind of the same thing. as the AHI because a couple of the main components in STP are helicity and CAPE. Next slide. So I can't say enough good things about Bob. I'll be forever grateful. Bob's retired now and he's down in Norman. I need to get back in touch with him and see how he's doing. So he's a really great guy. Next slide. Well, let's go back to March 11th, 1990. That was my first tornado as an adult. 2 days later, we hadn't had anything much in the way of tornado outbreaks in Kansas, it seemed, for several years, but we had the Heston outbreak, so named because of this tornado cell right here that produced 5 tornadoes in sequence, and the first one that struck the town of Heston right there. Well, again, I didn't have data, but at least the local guys indicated that, yeah, there might be a chance of tornadoes that day. Next slide. I left work about 2 o'clock. I knew there was a dry line, and I knew storms were going to form along the dry line, so I just took the closest one to me. That's better to be lucky than good, I guess. And this is a cell between Medicine Lodge and Pratt, and I followed it, next slide, until it produced a tornado about 90 minutes later near Pretty Prairie, Kansas. And you can see it touching down right here with a low-hanging wall cloud. And wow, I was amazed that in about a minute and a half or 2 minutes, this thing went out into a wedge. And I know I was pretty far away from it and behind it, but I remember my hands shaking on the video cameras. I was trying to shoot it because this is the first big tornado I'd ever seen in person. Next slide. Well, I continued to follow it for a little ways, but I couldn't stay with the storm, and then debris got in the way, so I broke off and drove back to Pratt. But a couple days later, photographs and video began to surface of 2 tornadoes on the ground at the same time near Heston after the tornado had gone through Heston. Nobody got killed in Heston, but there was somebody ahead of Heston and with the next tornado that got killed, unfortunately. But people began talking about 2 tornadoes next to each other just past Heston, which I thought was interesting. And there was a TV station in Wichita that had a video of that. Next slide. And this guy right here took an interest in this. I think it was partly because of the videos with the 2 tornadoes side by side, and he was interested in taking a look at it. This is Dr. Ted Fujita, or Mr. Tornado, as I call him. He probably was the most prominent tornado researcher in the late 50s, 60s, 70s, and on up into the 80s. And I'd read all about him, and he was kind of one of my heroes. And obviously, he came up with the first Fujita scale so we could start a climatology of how intense tornadoes are. Well, he sent one of his assistants, Dwayne Stigler, down to do a flyover and look at the track of the tornado and kind of map it. Next slide. Here's what I would call a preliminary mapping of his that focuses in around Heston. Here's Heston. The tornado went through Heston. And the photos of 2 tornadoes were taken in here. And there was a meteorologist in Wichita that somehow got a hold of the map, and they gave a news conference and kind of gave the impression he was working with Dr. Fujita on all this mapping. But I saw this on TV, and I thought, this looks kind of a little weird, because the pictures I saw, the tornadoes were side by side, but this has one tornado ending here, the next one starting behind it where you'd think the rear flank downdraft might be. And I thought that seemed a little odd. So being the geeky kid I was and so curious about these things, I took a couple evenings and a weekend and actually went up there and drove around on the roads. Next slide. I did my own mapping of this. And I drove these roads, walked fence rows, actually got my courage up and talked to a few people, and actually found a few photographs and descriptions of what they saw. And my mapping, if you go back one slide, is quite a bit different than the preliminary mapping from the flyover that Dr. Fujita asked to be done. Next slide. And so I put this together on a map. Next slide. And I even collected some photos from locals. Here you can see this gal described to me, here's the Heston tornado. We're looking north, and it's beginning to rope out. She said it looked like there was another tornado, and it kind of went toward it. And you can see it in the photograph here. And so it looked to me like the one tornado path actually merged into the other one. And I wasn't aware of any tornadoes that had been long track tornadoes, say 30 or 40 miles on the ground, that had merged into another tornado forming. I mean, there's lots of instances of satellite tornadoes or brief tornadoes in the inflow merging into a tornado, a larger tornado nearby, but this seemed a little different. Next slide. Well, I wasn't that good at collecting photographs and such, because I ran into a guy named Roy Britt who lives in Virginia, and he's not a meteorologist at all, but he's been interested in weather for years. And one of his hobbies, besides storm chasing, was collecting photographs and archiving data of older events. I know Roy used to chase with Tim Marshall quite a bit. And I ran into Roy up there looking at the same things I was looking at. He was fascinated with this tornado and finding photographs and talking to people. And he pointed me out to some other things. I should also point out, this is Dave Hoadley, the grandfather of storm chasing. They're good friends, and I met Dave through Roy, actually. Next slide. Well, Roy said, well, here, look at these photographs. And I found these from the southeast with this lady, Nancy Franson. And he had photographs of the Heston tornado coming and going completely around a new tornado and merging right into it. He even showed me a video that this gal's husband had shot. And so he gave me some really valuable information. Next slide. So I went home and I thought about this and I thought, well, the mapping really looks wrong. I don't know if this is that important, but it seems interesting because it looks like two tornadoes merging, one long track tornado merging into another one instead of just a new mesocyclone forming with a completely separate tornado. And so I thought, well, you know, maybe in the arrogance of my youth, I'll send some stuff to Dr. Fujita. I'll write this up as a couple-page thing and send some copies of photographs and just let him know I think it was a little different than what he had mapped. So I sent this to him, and I thought, well, I won't feel anything. Yeah, it was kind of a gutsy move, I have to admit. And I kind of forgot about this, but a couple months later, in June of 1990, next slide, Dr. Fujita himself, well, I was in my office at work, and my secretary buzzed me and said, there's a guy on the phone, Mr. Fujita, and he sounds like he's Asian. Do you want to take the call? Well, my heart leaped from here up into my throat because I realized probably who was calling me, and I had no idea who would call me like that. And so I took the call. I was scared to death, but he was very nice. I had a little trouble understanding him because I'm not great with accents, but he said, I like the little work you did here, and that looks really good. Would you mind if I had my assistant, Dwayne Stigler, come down and interview you again, or interview about this? And I said, sure, whatever you want, I'll help. So he sent his assistant down the next week, and we talked, and he went back up and resurveyed the area. Next slide. And he was cool enough to put together a map which matched mine, and he was writing a book called The Mystery of Severe Storms because he was getting on in years, and I think he wanted to kind of put a lot of his research together in the book. And bless his heart, he actually mentioned this case, and he actually mentioned me by name in our correspondence, and I was very, very touched or flattered by that. You know, it was just a small collaboration, but imagine reading about your hero for years, and then you end up getting a phone call from him, and you're able to work with him on something and influence some of the work. And I mean, I loved all his maps. I mean, I'd looked at all these path maps growing up, and I know Dr. Forbes showed some this afternoon. He did fascinating work. And so it was really exciting to be able to work with him just a little bit. Next slide. He even sent me an original of his mapping when he revised it, and that's kind of a prized possession of mine. Next. And I even got approached by other people after all this. Dr. Charles Doswell and Don Burgess, Mr. Radar, and they thought it'd be interesting to write up a note on this. So here I go from being this idiot kid, I felt like, out in Kansas to, in a fairly short amount of time, working with some fairly heavyweights. And it just shows you that you don't know what's going to happen, and sometimes you can do things that you maybe didn't think you were capable of or that were that important, and they turn out to be maybe influential just a little bit. Next slide. But let's go back to the dude here. This is still how I felt because if we go back to 1990, I still didn't have real-time data. And I thought, I still want to learn how to storm chase. And I'm not doing a very good job of it. Next slide. I saw in WeatherWise magazine they were starting to sell satellite photographs. There was no internet here outside of universities and certainly not out in Pratt, Kansas. And so I decided to order a satellite dish and buy a subscription from AccuWeather because they were starting to sell these subscriptions where you could get data at home if you had the satellite. So I dipped into my savings and got a satellite dish installed. Somebody did this for me on the back of our house where I lived with my dad. And I started getting data. Next slide. Looks like a lot of gobbledygook, actually. These are easier to read, actually, than METARs. METARs now are, they use the temperatures in Celsius. This was still in Fahrenheit. But you still had to look at this and decode it. And I guess my point is, Back then, it was a lot harder to get a surface map than today. You can get on the internet and go to any one of a number of sites and look at a surface map and pull it up. In a couple minutes, you have kind of an idea what's going on. Where with this, next slide, you take this data and you get a map and you start plotting it. And I could usually do one of these at lunch in maybe 20, 25 minutes if I was pretty sharp and analyze it. And so this is what I would do to storm chase to get just a basic idea of what was going on with the surface pattern. So again, my point is it was a little harder back then than it is now. Next slide. Also, with my data subscription, I could get some model data here. This is from what we called the NGM model. And next slide, I found that I could actually put things together with a computer program and print them out on a dot matrix printer in certain locations on the page, and then I get a plastic overlay and put it over it, and I can make up my own map. And I could get upper air maps, and I could also generate parameters like this energy helicity index that Bob and I had been working on. And so that was fun to be able to do that, because certainly that stuff wasn't available anywhere else. Next slide. And so that actually really helped my storm chasing as I got into 1991. This is the Andover tornado in 1991. I think it was April 26th, and I think Jim Ledoux this morning mentioned the Red Rock tornado. I think that was the same day. And this day, I kind of was expecting something to happen. The forecasters had been really good with it for several days too, so that sure helped. But I felt like I was a little more on top of it when I went out on this day. I left work again about 2 o'clock, went over toward Wichita, and managed to get on the cell that came up south of Wichita that produced the South Wichita tornado here, which got wide, hit Andover unfortunately, and killed 13 people in a mobile home park. And it got a lot wider and paralleled the Kansas Turnpike, so I was able to follow it. And that was quite an experience. Next slide. Threw this in here from my video because there's still kind of an urban legend going around that the pinkness of this tornado as it was going through South Wichita, I'm looking to the southwest, was due to a greenhouse that had pink geraniums. And people were saying the tornado sucked up the pink geraniums and it made it pink. And I was not aware of any burst of pink. I think the thing is that the sun was coming in, lighting the debris cloud, and if those old VHS cameras had pretty crappy color balance, and I think that's where the pink color comes from. So I kind of want to put that one to rest if I can. Next slide. Followed the tornado up the turnpike. Most tornadoes rope out. This is one that didn't. I haven't seen this very often. This just lifted into the sky and dissolved. It didn't rope out. I have no explanation for that. Next slide. That was looking northwest, and I look back to my east, and a new tornado from a new mesocyclone touched down east of the turnpike. Next slide. And I continued to follow it up the turnpike. And this right here is the Get Up Under the Girders underpass. How many have seen that video where KSNW reporter and cameraman and a family took shelter up there? Okay? Yeah. Well, I was behind this a couple miles while it was happening, and it looked to me like the tornado was actually just a little bit east of the turnpike. It's not really a good idea to get up under anyhow, but I don't think they took the full force of the tornado. I think they just got barely the west edge of the circulation. But that video was shown so much that people seem to get this idea that, well, we can just go up under the girders or park under the overpass and we're going to be safe. And that came from KSNW TV in Wichita, where a certain meteorologist that sometimes thought he knew a little more than he did. When I worked there, he would tell the cameramen and the reporters, well, if you get caught out there while you're shooting weather, get up under the overpass. So, I hate to say it, but that's where that came from. And we know in Moore, Oklahoma in 1999, some people lost their lives because of that idea. I hope we're getting better at it because it's been publicized quite a bit by people with the National Weather Service and other meteorologists that that's not where you're supposed to go because you get this wind tunnel effect. And I know we all get tired of everybody piling up under the overpasses. That's dangerous in and of itself, can cause car accidents and stuff. But that's where that came from. But I'll swear that this tornado did not hit that overpass directly. Next. You're going to hear me go back to cold core events because I'm really fascinated with those occasionally through this talk. Just wanted to mention 2 days later we had another cold core event in Pratt County. This time I was aware of it because I had data and I was trying to come up with this little composite. And I was the only one out really chasing that day and caught this tornado near Byers, Kansas in Pratt County. Next slide. And one of our patients, my dad, he had passed away in 1990, so I continued to run the company. But one of our patients with our medical equipment business knew somebody had taken this photograph, and they sent it to me. It looks an awful lot like my March 11th photo Once again, a very short top cell. Looks like a towering cumulus shower, but it's got a tornado hanging out of it. Same one I just showed you. So I thought that was interesting. Next. Well, let's talk about data. Data was always hard to get, but I'd solve some of the problems with that. You had to plot it by hand. But as the years went on in the 90s, computers came in, you could get laptops, and the internet was there, and you could begin to get data online. And then we had dial-up modems in the car, and eventually we got to Wi-Fi in the 2000s, where you can have a little Wi-Fi thing sitting on your dashboard. And so it really went from this, which is all by hand and a lot of work, more to this. Next slide. But I found something interesting happened, that I went from being underwhelmed with data, wanting more data, to being overwhelmed. Notice I have two laptops, and I got my head in my hands there. Sometimes I bury myself in the data, and I don't know if that helped my storm chasing, at least the way my mental processes work. I'll jump ahead here and just say that really the last couple of years, Shauna and I, when we go out and we just kind of want to have a little fun observing storms and see what we can learn, we've kind of dialed it back. We've gotten away from streaming because other people do that well, much better than we do. And I've even gotten rid of a lot of the equipment. So I'm not probably a cool guy, because I don't have all kinds of stickers on my car. I don't have any antennas anymore. I just like to go out there under the radar. So that's just me. But anyhow, we generally just use Shauna's cell phone anymore and radar scope. And I like to use my eyes, because sometimes I enjoy using that more, because that's kind of how I learned to do it back when there weren't maps. Next. Another thing you run into is the crowds. I think we all know about this. I love Dave Hoadley's cartoons, by the way. He's a wonderful cartoonist. And I've had a lot of these experiences where you think you're on the storm by yourself, you come over the hill, and everybody and their brother is on it, and you go, oh no. But none of us has exclusive rights to any storm, obviously. But this is interesting. Let's go back in time a bit. Next slide. Actually, before I do that, I'll just show this photo that my wife took in northwest Missouri a few years ago. This is what you have to deal with on some days, particularly when it's focused in one spot and everybody's pretty much on the same storm. Next slide. Well, I had an interesting experience in southwest Kansas in 1993 that really introduced me to the crowds, because I hadn't encountered that before. And I wrote it up, and Roger Edwards was kind enough to put it on his website. If you want to read the entire thing, there's the URL, I guess you call it. But anyhow, next slide. I was expecting tornadoes in southwest Kansas that day and the Oklahoma Panhandle, and got on a south end supercell, and this is the first tornado I saw near Guyman. I was out there by myself at that point, at least where I was. I know there were other storm chasers, I think, closer to it. And this is the second tornado, a smaller tornado. Next slide. Next tornado got bigger again. And this is near Hooker, Oklahoma, and this tornado went up into Kansas, and then a fourth tornado, which was a wedge, very similar, went on the ground. And the tornadoes were going straight north that day, pretty much similar to the Dodge City day last year. But it got increasingly crowded as I went up the road. There were more storm chasers and more locals. And you'd have to keep pulling over, and you'd videotape for 5 minutes, and then you move on. Well, I pulled over behind a vehicle that had amber lights on it. It wasn't marked as a police vehicle at all, and he had 2 wheels on and 2 wheels off. And so I sat there for a little bit and videotaped the tornado, and then I thought, well, I'll go on ahead and get up with it again, or kind of behind it, and just continue to watch. And so I went down the road about a mile, and then this guy in this amber lights vehicle came roaring up beside me, and he actually physically almost forced me over to the side of the road. He got out. He didn't have a cop uniform on, just a hat and a flannel shirt, and he yelled at me, "I'm the deputy sheriff of Stevens County, and you just went through a roadblock. You get out of the car." And he threw me up against the car and put handcuffs on me. And I was pretty taken aback, and people that know me know that sometimes when I'm taken aback, I can get a little hot-headed. So I got in a little yelling match with him, because I didn't think I'd broken a roadblock. That probably wasn't the best thing to do. Anyhow, he took me into the Stevens County Jail, and I spent the next 6 hours sitting in a jail cell. And the secretary, I think, could see that I was harmless, because he'd taken off again. And meanwhile, the tornado was going off in the distance. They impounded my car. But he finally came back a little before midnight, and he let me go. But he gave me a pretty stern lecture. And I tried to explain that I didn't realize it was a roadblock, but he wasn't having any of it. He was acting like, well, you're a big city guy and all this stuff. But I tried to apologize. They did let me go, but he said we may press charges, which kind of scared me. But I got a ride out to Moscow, Kansas, where they had impounded my car. I had to pay $200 to get it back, and I went back to Pratt with my tail between my legs. I found out talking to other storm chasers in this subsequent months maybe what happened. I don't really have a good clear picture. Sounds like there was another storm chaser. I have an idea who it might have been, who either drove out across a farm field or went through a fence or was speeding or something. And I don't know if they weren't able to catch him or exactly what happened, or maybe they thought I was him, or maybe I was just the next guy to come along and I was in the wrong spot, to be sure. But boy, I had quite a little experience with that. And next slide, you know, I wrote this up for Storm Track, and I think it was probably a little too controversial, but you can read it online. But what I do say in the article, I tried to tone myself down and look at it from his standpoint. Let's say you've got a big tornado going through your county, and you have a circus of frickin' chasers and locals going along with the tornado, and you're not clear which direction it's going. You know, I understood it was going straight north, but this guy would probably think it was going northeast, so he's, you know, probably keeping an eye on things. And so you get pretty stressed out, I'm sure. And so I was probably in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I'm sure this guy was just trying to do his job, though I have to admit it was pretty upsetting to me, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't do a lot of storm chasing in the mid-90s after this, because it really kind of scared me a bit. Next slide. So here's another one of Dave Hoadley's cartoons. I really don't think if you're ever speeding, you should try to pull the storm researcher card unless you're in the Dow. Maybe it works with them. I don't know. But he says, you see, officer, I'm a storm researcher. Don't use that line. Just obey the law. And since that time, anything that even remotely looks like a roadblock, I'll pull over and I'll go talk to the people. And I try to be very cognizant of that and realize that, you know, they're out there trying to do their job. So that's that experience. But I think you need to be aware of that, because a lot of people don't like us storm chasers, so we need to behave. All right. Next slide. Well, let's talk a little bit about summarize some of the tornado forecasting research I've done. We'll do this very briefly. I've already talked about cold core tornadoes and the development of the EHI, which is still kind of used today. One other thing I'll talk about, I could talk about a lot of stuff, but we'll talk about non-mesocyclone tornadoes. The next slide. First time I saw a land spout was back in 1991. I wasn't sure what I was looking at. There was a dry line and a sharp wind shift in southwest Kansas on a day in May. And I went out to the storms. They didn't look like supercells. They looked very linear, because I guess they were right on the boundary. But if you look close, you can't really see it very well. But there's a column of dust going up into the storm here. And I look back to the southwest. Here's another column of dust. And they were all right along that line. And so I said, I guess these are land spouts. I'd never seen one before. So I went home. Next slide. Started doing some reading about these. And I found a paper by Wakamoto and Wilson about non-supercell tornadoes. And we should distinguish land spouts from bow echo tornadoes or QLCS tornadoes, which are also non-mesocyclone tornadoes, we know. But anyhow, I did the reading and learned that they occur on boundaries where there's a sharp wind shift. You have CAPE and the updrafts. They stay right over the boundary. They don't form behind it or in front of it or move away from it. They lock onto the boundary, and if there's not a lot of wind and the boundary's not moving a whole lot and there's not a lot of temperature change, you have this vorticity on the boundary, and it's already oriented in the vertical, and all you have to do is stretch it, and you may get a tornado if things come together right. Well, after doing a little research, I also figured a piece of the equation that wasn't really specifically mentioned is that you really need strong surface heating and steep near-ground lapse rates. And let's show the next slide. I looked at some soundings associated with what looked like land spouts and found there's a really rapid temperature change here in the bottom of the sounding. And that means it was pretty warm or pretty hot at the surface. Notice there's also no convective inhibition in blue here. It just goes right to a lot of CAPE. And so with this kind of situation, air parcels, when they get heated, can ramp up and rise pretty rapidly. Next slide. There's nothing really too unusual about that profile, because it's probably similar to that for most days where you have a lot of dust devils, particularly in western Kansas or eastern Colorado. But if you can put that profile together with a situation where you have a thunderstorm cell that's locked right onto this boundary, the boundary's not moving too fast, and it can stay right with the boundary, the stretching can get you a tornado. I've also seen other cases where when the storms gust out, if you have those steep lapse rates, sometimes you can get good gustinados, with those situations. Next slide. So I got together with Jim Caruso at the National Weather Service office back in the early 2000s, and we decided to put together a little paper. Now, certainly landspouts are not a very forecastable event, and most of them aren't very strong, but every once in a while, you do get a fairly prolific event that lasts for 45 to 90 minutes, and you get multiple landspouts, and sometimes some of these can get up to, maybe EF2 strength. And so we tried to address this, next slide, with this little composite. I like to do composites or pattern recognition. And you need a stationary or slow-moving boundary. You need CAPE in here. And a very key component is having a lot of heating with little or no sin in here coming up along the boundary. And if you can get storms to develop on the boundary where the upper level winds are not so strong that they'll move away from the boundary, and the boundary's keeping them focused on the boundary, that stretching can get you these landspouts. Here's an example. Next slide. This is in May of 2004, south central Nebraska. Here's a stationary front. It was actually slowly moving southeastward. This is helicity from the SPC mesoanalysis. A lot of helicity up in here. There was even a supercell tornado up here north of this warm front, but I was over here where there's not a lot of helicity. There's some, but not a lot. And these storms formed right on this boundary with CAPE. It was around 3,000 or 4,000 surface-based in this area. Next slide. And something important here is the steep lapse rates off the SPC mesoanalysis, the low-level lapse rates. There's a little axis going up right along the boundary. So as I approached a storm there, next slide, this thing was producing tornadoes left and right. Here's a picture that you've got 3 tornadoes here, and they seem to be right on that boundary. And I think that's because we had all the elements together that I showed you in that composite graphic that the National Weather Service uses sometimes in the Central Plains. I know several offices that use that in their training. Next slide. This is the same case. The first tornadoes looked a lot like landspouts, where they're kind of a dusty column that's wider at the bottom than at the top. But I noticed as the storms went on and other tornadoes formed a little further to the north along the same line, some of these seemed to morph into what looked like supercell tornadoes with a rear flank downdraft, wall clouds, and that sort of thing. So I thought that was interesting. Next slide. So some additional work I'd like to do. I think there's something called hybrid events that use both non-mesocyclone and supercell processes. And they don't happen that often, but some of them can actually be kind of prolific. Next slide. So what I'd like to do is examine some of those tornado cases and look at some of the ingredients. And I also think we need a little revision of the non-supercell tornado parameter that's on the SPC mesoanalysis page, because that doesn't seem to work that well. I think there might be some way to improve that. And again, not trying to forecast individual localized landspouts, but more the cases where you might have one of those more prolific events. Next slide. Here's one in July of 2015, an EF3 tornado northwest of Hutchinson, Kansas. It was on the ground for at least 30 minutes. The storm's clearly a supercell, but SPC wasn't out looking tornadoes in this area. I don't think anybody was out looking tornadoes in this area that day, but there was a boundary, very similar to my composite that was sinking southward. Storm formed on the boundary, and you got this landspout that seemed to morph more into a, I guess you'd call the storm a supercell, but I would call it a kind of a hybrid event. So I'd like to look at some of those, and this is just an opinion, but I think the Gerald, Texas tornado way back 20 years ago had some elements of this. And so if I get some time, I've got a list of these events, and I'd like to go back and look at them and see what I can pull out of it. Next slide. One other thing, and then I'll get less technical. DHI has its limitations. In small CAPE situations, sometimes it just doesn't seem to work very well. It doesn't seem to highlight areas. And so I think there's some other ways. I've had people come up to me, can you make the DHI work better? Well, I'm not in the business of trying to invent magic parameters, but I would like to see if we could improve it a little bit. And I think one way we could look at it, wind shear has really been parsed to death, I think, in the research. But I'm not so sure about the bottom 4 or 6 kilometers of the CAPE in the soundings. There may be some ways to take a look at that and see how the CAPE is distributed and convert that to, potential vertical parcel acceleration or something like that, and combine that with some measures of wind shear to improve that. So that's something I'd like to take a look at. I think that might work, might help a little bit in some of these smaller CAPE situations, like along the Gulf Coast or in the cool season. Next slide. Do want to show one case here real quick, and I'm not ragging on SPC. This was a really difficult forecast, but I think it was Dr. Forbes that mentioned this case. It was August 24th of last year. This is the late morning SPC tornado outlook, and they were had a 2% up there near Kansas City. Notice there's nothing over here. Well, a little over 2 hours later, next slide, this tornado tears into Kokomo, Indiana. At least it was only an EF3, and I don't think anybody got hurt. But I think they barely got a tornado watch out, and at least they were getting some tornado warnings. But what's interesting is, there was no outlook. Nobody was expecting anything up here, including me. And look at all those tornadoes. They even went up into southwest Ontario. So that was a pretty big little tornado outbreak, and I won't get into the details of it. But next slide. I've been experimenting with some things with low-level parcel acceleration combined with low-level wind shear to kind of come up with a number similar to STP or one of those things. And this didn't work quite as well as I thought, but it does kind of highlight this area. We had some outflow boundaries, and this environment here seemed to have a fair amount of cape down in low levels and enough low-level wind shear that we got tornadoes in here. And if you look at the next slide, this is the STP, and the AHI was similar. We did get values that were over 1, but nothing that was very dramatic, because that's kind of garden variety values. And so I'm looking for something that might help pull out a little more detail, particularly in the lower part of the sounding regarding the Cape. We'll see if I get some time to look at this more and see if something comes out of it. We'll just see. Next slide. Well, let's get off the technical stuff and just look at a few tornado chasing highlights over the years. I'm not a photographer, and I don't pretend to be. Some of these might be a little soft, but I like to take pictures to document the storms so I can go back and look at those with the notes and all that good stuff. Here's the next, let's go to the next slide. This is a tornado near Clearwater, Kansas in 1991, looking southwest, and this is one of my favorite tornado pictures. I was probably a little too close. I was within a mile, but it was a very pretty tornado. Next slide. Same tornado as it's starting to get narrower, and I got to watch the whole rope out sequence from about a mile away, and it was almost like over my head. Probably not the smartest place to be, but I was there, and that was very interesting, I'll tell you that. Next. This is my first encounter with a predominantly HP storm. I'd seen a few of these before, but this thing went on for 6 hours, and it was always wet in here, it seemed like. This is north central Kansas, June 1992, looking west. Next slide. Usually with HP storms, you look for the tornado back in here, but often you can't see it because of the rain. But this storm would do interesting things. It seemed like mesocyclones would form along the edge, and it was like a merry-go-round, and sometimes the rain would go away and you'd see the tornado. Sometimes you wouldn't. There was even an anticyclonic tornado. This thing produced a lot of different tornadoes, and it's one of those storms where I'll be honest with you, I had no idea really what was going on, and it just emphasizes that you'll always see something different with each storm. I mean, they have common features, but each storm is unique. Next slide. Remember, with my experience in southwest Kansas, I said I didn't chase a whole lot in the mid-90s, which is true. But in 1999, I went on a storm chase in northwest Kansas near Almena. And I really liked this storm because this tornado was out in open country. I think it did hit a farm, but nobody got hurt. Mostly in open country. It was on a hill southeast of Almena, and I got to sit there for almost an hour and watch the storm do its thing and produce a tornado. And it had a beautiful rear flank downdraft in here with the sun going. Next slide. And this is another case of where sometimes you don't know if you want to classify a storm as HP or classic, because as it got more mature, the rain would wrap around it, and nature defies a lot of these categorizations. Often storms become kind of HP, even if they've been classic in their mature phase with the tornado. But next slide. Then the rain sometimes will clear back out, and we've got a nice rope out of this. Next slide. This is a tornado southeast of Dodge City, northwest of Greensburg, back in 2002. It's interesting in that it looked like a couple of separate tornadoes here, and they actually looked like they came together and made this large tornado, and you could see suction vortices. But what was most interesting about this, well, I guess two things. Most of the time when I've heard tornadoes, it sounds kind of like a waterfall, but this one sounded like a jet engine that was changing pitch, and I remember that very specifically. And I was looking west at it, and it looked like it was coming straight toward me, not very fast. And I thought, well, I guess I better get out of the way, so I'll go south. So once again, something happened that reminded me that you don't understand everything. You're experience-based. Sometimes you run into things you did not anticipate because you haven't experienced them before. I guess the storm put out some outflow, and this tornado began to dive rather quickly to the south-southeast. So I tried to get away from it, and it seemed like it was following me. And boy, I had to take the car up to about 95, and there was dirt hitting the side of my car, and it scared the crap out of me. And I'll tell you, you get to a place where I understand what I'm seeing and what I'm doing, and I'm just fine. Well, not necessarily. You need to stay humble and keep your eyes open and always be prepared for something unexpected to happen. Next. This is my favorite type of tornado, just out in the open country. This is northern Nebraska in 2003 near Stewart. Just a nice white tornado out in the open with a rear flank downdraft and a pretty environment there in the country. Next slide. About, I think it's a week or 10 days later, this is the Manchester, South Dakota day that Tim Samaras got his epic probe data on, where the tornado actually directly hit his probes. But this is not the same storm. This is further to the southeast. I was on a storm southwest of Sioux Falls, and it didn't produce as strong or as long-lived tornadoes, but it did produce 10 fairly brief tornadoes. This is one of my favorite photographs we're looking northwest. I love the color in it. I like the angles of the tornadoes. This is the closest one to me with a fairly new mesocyclone, and I think this is an older mesocyclone that's occluding, and it has the other tornado in it. Next slide. 2004 was a big year for tornadoes for me, and we're going to go back to cold core again. You'll keep seeing me do that. Here's another cold core storm in northwest Kansas where you can see the top, and if you look close, you can see the tornado underneath it. Here it's sheared over pretty much, so it looks like the tornado tube, if you want to call it that, really bends over at a 45-degree angle and then probably goes up there. And here it is roping out. So that was kind of cool. Next slide. A lot of tornadoes in 2004. This is the Hallam Day. I was in south central Nebraska, east of Hebron. I know a lot of people were on that. I think Jim Ledoux was on this storm. This is the tornado before Hallam. I remember I was looking to the northwest and a lot of dirt. That was a rear flank downdraft. Couldn't tell what was going on back in here, but as the dirt cleared, there was a big wedge. This probably wasn't a particularly strong tornado, but then the next tornado that occurred off to the east with the next mesocyclone, next slide, formed fairly rapidly. It was near Dakin, Nebraska, and I just remember watching this, and it's one of the more awesome things I've seen. This thing was a cone, and then it began to expand into this big, ugly-looking tornado, and it goes from being a little cone to almost a mile wide with all this dirt flying around. Thankfully, I was well south of it. And I ran into another roadblock. This was moving northeast, and the police handled that one really well. They had the road clearly blocked and didn't let anybody go north where the tornado would have crossed the road. And so you really want to obey that stuff and not argue with officers. I was more than glad to cut off my chase at that point rather than continue on. Next slide. Here's a tornado south of Wichita, still 2004. Pretty sunlit tornado that the late, great Eric Wynn got some great pictures of up closer. Next slide. Same storm, but later near sunset, produced a tornado near Rock, Kansas. And unbeknownst to me, my future wife was on this storm chasing. She was back in a lot closer to it and got some pretty good video. So she did a nice job that day. Next slide. This is still 2004, but we're now in July. This is July 1st. And you don't think of cold core situations in Kansas in July, do you? But this is an interesting one. I was working on a paper with Jared Geyer at SPC, a climatology of cold core storms, and I was just working on that in my office for a conference, and at lunch I pulled up a map on the computer, and I noticed, it looks like there's a subtle closed circulation in northwest Kansas on the satellite. So there's a closed low there, and I thought, well, there's a surface low, and it looks like there's a boundary. I think I'll grab my camera and drive up to Salina and just see what I see, because I wasn't expecting much, but I thought this is an interesting one that's in the summer. Let's see if anything happens from it. Next slide. I went up north of Lincoln, Kansas, and watched this cell with that little lowering I just showed you. And sure enough, a little tornado came down and lasted about 7 minutes over open country. Nobody out there. It didn't even get reported to the Weather Service. I called it in, and they didn't believe me until I sent them the photos. And I guess I don't blame them because I don't think any severe was outlooked up in that area that day. Next slide. Here it is roping out. Next slide. Well, what's interesting, that was the only tornado in the country that day, and it's pretty isolated up there. And it showed that cold core composite that I came up with works, works a fairly decent amount of the time. Interesting, even in the summer sometimes. Next slide. And the only way you'd know to go there, again, is from that composite I came up with. If you look at the satellite there, you can see the rotation in the clouds with the upper low here. There was a surface low on the surface map, and then there was this little wind shift boundary, which you might call a quasi-warm front. I just got on a cell that was east of the surface low, and that's what happened. So it fit the composite again. Next slide. 2004 again, lots of tornadoes. This is Iowa. I think a lot of storm chasers have complained about getting tornadoes in Iowa. It seems to take a while. It sure took me a long time. Boy, I can't talk tonight, sorry. But anyhow, after several years of trying, I finally, in August of 2004, got a tornado in southwest Iowa near Hamburg, looking west there. Next slide. Okay, since I had such a big 2004 forecasting-wise, Tim Samaras, who I knew kind of from this conference because he helped start it with Roger Hill, he approached me about forecasting for him in 2005 for a couple weeks with him and Carl Jung. And I was really excited to be asked. And I didn't tell him that I think I was kind of lucky on a lot of these storms, but I was more than willing to go with him and try to forecast. And I really connected well with Tim and Carl. I mean, they're both very positive people, very uplifting, and there's none of this pissing contest you get into sometimes with some chasers. It was just really enthusiastic about doing his research, a very sharp engineer, and we really connected and had a great couple of weeks. And I mean, that's one of the special times in my life. And Tim and Carl were really cool individuals. Next slide. This is the first tornado we intercepted and tried to put probes out on. Got a little too close, and I guess I'm a little embarrassed about this one. What happened was we had 3 cars. There were a National Geographic videographers, and I was driving Karsten Peter, who was a National Geographic still photographer in my car, and we're all following Tim. And we're trying to get to this tornado to deploy, but it was moving a little faster than we originally thought. Tim pulled off on a road, but there was a lot of dust in the air because the wind was blowing toward the tornado, and there hadn't been any rain, and it was a really dusty road. So I couldn't see him turn off, and for some reason, our radios weren't working. I don't know if I knocked it out of adjustment, but I was driving, and Karsten was sitting next to me. Next slide. And we nearly drove into the tornado, and I had to back up because I wasn't clear what was going on. And not proud of that, but it makes for some interesting video, and so since we've got video night coming up here soon, I thought we'd run this. I showed this about 9 or 10 years ago here, but there's probably some of you guys that have not seen it. And Tim showed it, I think, during video night about 10 years ago. But I thought we'd take another look at it. This is not for broadcast, but I thought you guys might be interested to watch it. It's about 3 minutes. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm having trouble seeing here.
Yeah.
It's just too much dirt. Tornadoes to the west of us. And we're driving north, trying to get in position, we think, for our probe intercept.
What do you think? What do you think? Careful if they stop somewhere in the gust. Careful. Okay. I cannot see. Uh-oh.
So I finally realized, I better start backing up. This isn't right.
Hang on. Hang on. That was a close call.
Listen to the sound on this. This is something, the way the wind's sounding. Hope it comes across. There's the tornado.
Okay. No, go. Oh, wait. Wait.
Basically, I'm working for Karsten here, so I'm basically doing what he wants me to do.
Sound is incredible.
Yes, it is.
Be careful. Yeah, maybe it's coming back.
Start to get some hail. That's the hope. We're looking northeast now. Now we're getting up just west of it.
Yeah, look at that. Look at that inflow streamer.
Incredible.
That right there was pretty incredible, watching that inflow streamer coming up into it over our heads. Battery's dead, sorry. Then we turned east to follow it.
Stop here. There you have an overview. Okay, great. Stop here. Oh, okay, that goes back.
So this kind of morphed into a big Dante's Inferno type vortex here. This was something to see with little vortices inside there. And we're only about a half mile behind it here.
Ooh, Jesus, Madonna. What we can do is if we go here on the right side and then just go try to catch it from the other side. You know, probably they have done the same.
So that's that. Let's go to the next slide. That was kind of an exciting experience. I'm not sure we deserve claps for that, but it's entertaining nevertheless. I'll say that. This is the same tornado. It actually reformed into this dark cone then and went off to the east of us while we were in the hook. And Tim and Carl had went on because they didn't know where we were at, and they tried, I think, to do one probe deployment. They saw other tornadoes, and we missed out on those. But we hooked up with him later. Next slide. We saw a lot of tornadoes during that period. We went from the Dakotas down to Texas and then all the way back up to Iowa. This is in western Texas. I think it was a Sunday afternoon in Kent County. And you see a tornado has just touched down from a supercell, and there Tim's in the foreground. It's a picture I took of him getting his camera out. Next slide. This cell went on for a couple of hours, and it began to become more HP. And so while we were watching it right in here, we're looking south here, suddenly a tornado comes out of the rain to our southwest, and I think we've got enough time. Pretty wet, but we put some probes out, hoping that it would go across that. It actually went across the road in front of us and is to the southeast of us now on the other side of the road, and just kind of planted itself there in a field about a quarter or a half mile to our southeast. Next slide. Then the outflow from the storm took the tornado, which was over here, and moved it back across the road. And so we had to retreat back to the north. We had 2 shots at hitting the probes, but unfortunately it just missed both times. Next slide. Well, that was really quite an experience going with Tim. I'll talk more about Tim here in a moment. Let's jump ahead. I'm married now to my wife, Shauna, and this is the Joplin tornado. I won't say a whole lot about it other than here's the tornado. We went through Joplin. It was very hard to see. It was kind of a scary situation, so we got on the interstate southeast of the tornado, or where it might be, and that's the only look we got at it. And boy, I hope to God there's not another tornado that kills triple digits, a single tornado like this one did. But it just goes to show, even with all our technology and such, we can still have situations where everything comes together. Joplin's one of the worst things I've ever seen. Next slide. Here's what it's more fun to see is a big wedge that doesn't hit anything. This is west of Bennington, Kansas in 2013. A photo that Shauna took. This tornado was on the ground for about an hour. I'm sure a lot of you guys were on this one. Next slide. And then another tornado that scared the crap out of me, just like Joplin. This is the El Reno tornado. I won't talk much about it because it's already been talked to death. I'll just say that we didn't know where the tornado was. Couldn't see it. I think Tim pointed out in his talk this afternoon that a lot of the times with these big tornadoes, you can't see it, particularly if you're very close. And it was coming a lot faster than we thought. I'm driving south, trying to get out of the way on a gravel road. Next slide. I thought we'd cleared the path. I stopped the car. Shauna didn't like that too well. I thought, I'm just going to get out and look at it for a moment. I took 5 seconds and looked at it, and all I could see was this wall of what looked like dark steam going around. There's a guy right here with headlights. I could see a couple other cars ahead of it, and I just kind of wonder what happened to those people, because it looked like it was coming fast, and it looked really scary. I jumped back in the car and just said, we're getting the heck out of here and going as far south as we can. So we did. Next slide. And probably got about 3 miles south of it, and the dust from the RFD cleared. It was a really strong RFD. Here's the tornado looking northeast, and you have one vortex in here. It looks like a wedge. Another vortex looks like a wedge in here, and I think the tornado probably extends over here. You know, it was probably a couple miles wide or more. And we all know what happened with that. Very sad day. Next slide. I'll always remember Tim and Carl. Next slide. And of course, Paul. Tim had actually quite an impact on my life. Even when I just see him once a year out in the field, when we talk, I always felt more positive and more uplifted. He respected my work. I really respected his. He was a really sharp guy, quite an individual, and I think his influence will continue to be felt not only at this conference, but in the weather world and other people for a long time. I had a nice conversation with Kathy Samaras about that last night. Next slide. Well, we didn't chase hardly at all in 2014. I'm going to be honest with you. El Reno shook me up, and we haven't been to central Oklahoma since. That was kind of a tough thing. But we did go out in the open plains in 2015. We decided to chase in less populated areas. This is eastern Colorado, and it's another cold core event. Surprise. I think this is May 9th of 2015. There was a low northeast of Pueblo and a couple supercells. This is the easternmost one that was coming up along the warm front. We're looking southwest near Cheyenne Wells, and as you know, eastern Colorado is a wonderful place. You can see for miles. And this tornado here is probably about 25 miles away. This is the first tornado looking southwest. You can see the RFD. Already, you can see another mesocyclone forming there, and this is a new tornado from that mesocyclone. Next slide. And second tornado got fairly large, and what was really interesting, I don't think these are mesocyclones here, it's just there was so much stretching and vertical motion. You got all these little funnels and maybe brief tornadoes, satellites around it. That was something to see. Next slide. Tornado got bigger in the horizon, and then it eventually roped out, and this is a third tornado. There were three primary tornadoes, and we just got to sit in the same position for about 45 minutes and watch the tornadoes, and that was really, really something. And I love that over open country. This is rated EF0, but I think it's quite possible it could have been maybe an EF2 or an EF3 if it had hit anything. Next slide. So it was a fairly prolific cold core event. This is one of Shauna's favorite photos. While we're watching the tornado, the cows seem to be more interested in us than the tornado. I'm sure they don't know what a tornado is, but she was telling the cows, you need to be looking that direction, not at us. Next slide. And here's kind of a rare photograph of me watching the tornado in the same frame with the tornado. Notice I'm wearing a jacket. These cold core events can be really cool. Often the temperatures are in just the 60s, and I guess it's just all that cold air aloft. Here's another funnel with it too. But all that cold air aloft can get you tornadoes sometimes. And so take a jacket with you if you ever chase some of these, because with a howling east wind, it can get downright chilly out there while you're watching a tornado, believe it or not. Next slide. This is about a month later in northeast Colorado, a big tornado in open country northwest of Burlington. We were out with Bill and Anna Stromberg, our good friends from California. We hook up with them usually once or twice a year. Next slide. Same tornado we were just looking at, occluding, and then a new mesocyclone looking northwest with a new tornado. Next slide. Love eastern Colorado. Then we hooked up again in northwest South Dakota, June of 2015. This is a white tornado up just northwest South Dakota. I can't remember the names of the towns. But what's interesting here, we were following Bill and Anna. We'd been trying to position ourselves on this supercell for a long time and hadn't seen a tornado. And the road network's not great. So we're going straight south, and the storm's behind us. We're trying to get to an eastern road. And Bill, it tells you you need to watch in your rearview mirror, because Bill suddenly comes across the radar and said, there's a tornado behind us. And thank you, Bill, for pointing that, because we stopped the cars, jumped out. And really, really pretty tornado there over open country, and we would have missed it. It didn't last that long if not for Bill seeing it. Next slide. Same trip, Sean and I went over to Devil's Tower and saw LP supercell near the Devil's Tower. Then we looked back to the west the same day. Next slide. And new supercell formed and became very well organized behind Devil's Tower here looking to the west, and this soon became tornado warned. Didn't produce a tornado, but I think this is a cool photograph, and I'll be honest with you, there was a couple times I was expecting a spaceship to come out of there and land somewhere. Next slide. Last year, and I'll kind of close things up here very shortly. Last year, Shauna's father died, so we didn't get out a lot, but we did get out 3 days on the right days there at the end of May, May 23rd, 24th, and 25th. This is a tornado near Woodward. It was fun to watch out in open country. Next slide. This is the Dodge City Day that's been talked about a lot. We're a little far away and slightly out of position, so you can see the tornado here from about 25 miles away at least. You know this isn't a cold core event because the storm extends way up out of the frame, but you can still see the tornado there. And it put a pretty large tornado on the ground at one point. I don't know how many tornadoes there were here. I think Tim was saying one of his colleagues counted something like 12 or 13. I had the impression there was something like 5 or 6 main mesocyclones and then lots of other stuff I don't know how to categorize. Next slide. What was fun, though, was starting way far away and seeing the storm from a distance with a tornado under it, and then being able to get fairly close underneath it because the tornadoes went on so long with the tornadoes going up along the highway there. You can see the suction vortices looking to the west. Next slide. And it planted a pretty good tornado again on the ground. And I know I was thinking, oh my gosh, please don't go up in the into Dodge City. We talked about that earlier. And thankfully, this one went off to the northwest and over to the left. And though I think it hit some houses out in the country, it didn't hit Dodge City. This is Dodge City in the foreground. And you can see how fortunate Dodge City was, as I think Tim and maybe somebody else had mentioned. The tornado touched down just north of Dodge City. Here's Dodge City in the foreground. We're looking northwest. Here's some of the water towers. And notice all the traffic. Boy, that was another circus, and I could talk 30 minutes about that one. Anyhow, Dodge City was very fortunate, thankfully, that day. Next slide. This is the last day of our chase, and we got the Chapman tornado near the end. That's been talked about here today, too. Here, we're looking due north, back edge of the tornado, big RFD. At this point, we're looking north. We had to catch back up to it because we didn't go all the way to Wichita, but we were on that southern cell that Tim was talking about, and we had to come back to it. But we saw the end of it here with Shauna's photograph, and thank God this went just south of Chapman, because as we were watching it and I was looking at radar, I was thinking, oh my, is Chapman going to get hit again like they did in 2008, I think it was? Yeah, next slide. I still feel like this a lot of the time, and I think it's okay, because it keeps you humble and it keeps you asking questions, and hopefully keeps you learning. So I'm not entirely ashamed of that. Next slide. One of the nice things about storm chasing are some of the friends and people you meet, and I think I ought to say a few words about that. You might even meet your soulmate. You don't know. Next slide. At a conference in Lawrence, an advanced spotter meeting in the early 2000s, I met my wife, Shauna. We kind of became friends over a period, and I connected with Shauna immediately because a lot of the stuff she did, like mine, this is her 8th grade science project in North Kansas City. I think she came in 4th. Next slide. And 4th place. Yes, you're welcome, dear. And what's really interesting, again, synchronicity. This is actually a cold core event. The tornado she focused on in here was at Frontenac, Kansas, her parents' hometown. It was an F3. She actually drove the damage path with her uncle. And I think she was 13 years old, if I'm right, at this time. And what's interesting, it was a cold core event with the highest dew point I could even find on that was 47 degrees. That's pretty amazing. So there's a lot of interesting synchronicity there with her picking out that tornado. Next slide. Shauna was storm chasing before I met her, so I really respected her for that. Next slide. I know storm chasing's hard to do for women, It's getting more accepted, and I love seeing more women here. But it used to be 15 years ago, you wouldn't see any women. And so I think that's a really cool development. She helped me write a book. I'd already signed the contract and was working on it. I realized I needed to simplify it. Shauna's good with kids, so I got her help. I have to say that 50% of this book we wrote a few years ago is really due to her. So I want to give her credit even though her name's on the cover. Not on the cover, unfortunately. Next slide. She's a good speaker. She did a talk here at ChaserCon a while back about how storm chasers can help when a tornado has just occurred before first responders get there. And just as importantly, what not to do as well as what you can do. You don't want to do too much, but you can help. And maybe one of these days she'll update that talk. She's a great speaker. Next slide. Great talking to kids, and she's a good storm chase partner. So I really appreciate her. Next slide. When Shauna's not available, we have 2 cats. This is Lucy, and she sometimes likes to sit in the front seat with me when I storm chase. She's not as good with the video camera, but she's good company. I'll tell you that. Next slide. And I also want to mention her friends Bill and Anna Stromberg. What I want to say about Bill, through him, I guess, you heard me talk about music when I was younger. And my interest in film scores, I thought that's a really odd mix of interests, film scores, music, and storm chasing. Well, I met Bill at this very conference along with his wife, Anna. They're both very good musicians, and he's a composer, and he's actually composed film scores, and he's recorded film scores. And so suddenly I meet this guy, and I was actually familiar with some of his work when I met him here in 2010, and we became good friends. And Sean is good friends with Anna. And so you just never know who or what you're going to run into, and that's allowed me to live a little bit of my music interests through Bill, and he can live some of his storm chasing things interest through me as we talk. So that's been a valuable friendship. So again, you don't know who you're going to meet. Next slide. I just want to point out, Bill's a really good conductor. He's done a number of albums recording with the Moscow Symphony Orchestra, as well as some European orchestras and an orchestra in England. This is his friend John Morgan, and here's Anna. And they reconstruct film scores and re-record things. At least they've done a lot of that in the past. It's getting pretty expensive to do these days, so it doesn't get done as much. But he's a very talented individual, and I appreciate Bill and Anna's friendship very much. Next slide. And we do get together in Storm Chase usually a couple times a year. So you don't know who you're going to meet. Next slide. Keep your eyes open. It's a great way to meet friends like Glenn Geist and other people that there's too many people numerous to mention here. Next slide. You can give me a 20 in the bar later, okay? So just to close things up, life's a journey, not a destination. I think there's a lot to that. That's the way my life's gone. Next slide. You may see me looking like this in 15 to 20 years. I hope I can still go out and storm chase a couple times a year. I love Dave Hoadley's cartoons. Next slide. I'm going to show one more short video. Don't want this to be all about me. The two guys that have founded this conference, and we wouldn't have this without them, are Tim Samaras, who's no longer with us, and Roger Hill. And this started at Tim's house. And when it got to be too big, they moved it elsewhere. But I want to hear what they have to say about what inspired them. Shauna was interviewing them in 2012, and this is what inspired them when they were talking about a TV show, Nova, on PBS in 1986. Let's hear what they say.
I mean, I wanted to go chase in the 70s, but every time I ask my friends, hey, let's go chase that storm, they look at me and says, why? Why do you want to go out there and do that? He says, well, because I think it's cool. You know, I like dark, scary bases. I love rain, you know, lightning. Maybe we'll get lucky, you know, or you see a tornado. But back then I didn't know how to chase, you know. Dew points in eastern Colorado were 42 degrees, and I was out there chasing this huge high-base thunderstorm. I think it's going to produce this big sod-sucking monster tornado. But, you know, young and foolish. But Howie Bluestein was the one that was out in the field using this experimental Doppler radar equipment, collecting data. And I thought, that is like the coolest thing in the world. Here's this guy out there hunting tornadoes down and trying to apply some good science to figure out what makes them tick. And so that lit my rocket. Never looked back.
So obviously you too, huh? Howie?
That television show is actually what inspired me to chase. Of course, growing up in eastern Kansas, I got my baptism by fire with the Topeka, Kansas F5 back in 1966.
Really?
That was my first encounter with a tornado, and I was fascinated with weather ever since then. But that program with Howie, that Nova show, is what really inspired me.
Okay. Wow. Next slide. We'll wrap it here real quick. Let's go to the next slide here if we can do it. I just want to kind of close with a quote from Tim. Keep your focus on your passion in life and the things you enjoy doing. You'll get there. Trust me, I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. Tim was a very influential person in my life. Next slide. And for all you nerds and geeks out there, to paraphrase it, if you focus on your passion, don't get caught up in getting your 5 minutes of fame or getting really competitive, but focus on your passion, do some hard work, and kind of look for it. Don't get caught up in too many things, but just look ahead and keep doing what you're doing. I think it gets better, okay? And your road will probably lead you where you don't expect it to. It's been fun. I hope I didn't go on too long. Thanks for listening to me, and I hope you all have a safe chase season. Get out there and enjoy watching the storms, and be careful and learn everything you can, okay? Thanks very much. Thanks.
John Davies, folks. Wasn't he great? Thank you, John. Before we take a break here, this pretty much wraps up the day, except after this we are going to have our famous video night. So come on back and watch lots of videos that you all have submitted for us. But before we go, I'd like to thank again all of our speakers from today that are still here. Jim Ledoux, Tim Marshall, Dr. Forbes, Mitch DeBrowner, John Davies. All you folks did a fantastic job, and we appreciate all that you've done for ChaserCon. Oh, no, thank you. And so with that, you know what? It's 8:45. Let's just take a 15-minute break, come back at 9, and we'll get video night rolling.